So as Vice-Chancellor, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here to the University of Chester, to our School of Education building. It's wonderful to see governors, colleagues, students, members of the public here on campus, and we also welcome everyone who is watching this live online. Now, an inaugural lecture is a key milestone in an academic's career. Inaugural lectures provide newly appointed professors with the opportunity to share their achievements in research, innovation and engagement before an audience. On this occasion, I'd like to extend an especially warm welcome to Professor Simon Grennan's friends and colleagues who join him to celebrate tonight. Professor Grennan is a Professor of Art and Design, and in his lecture, Without Meaningful Recourse to Trace, Grennan and Sperandios digital drawings in the 1990s, he will discuss how the craft of drawing impacts upon the development of drawing technology, focusing upon artist Grennan and Sperandios' use of emerging digital edge recognition and vectorisation techniques in the 1990s, locating these innovations relative to older techniques such as tracing and rotoscoping, and even older ideas about drawing, visualising and the body. Following on from this lecture, I'd like to invite you all to join us for a drink in the exhibition space in Senate House across campus, where an exhibition of Simon's work is on display. And I'd now like to invite Professor Paul Bissell, our Pro-Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation, to introduce Professor Grennan to our audience tonight. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm really delighted to introduce Professor Simon Grennan, Professor of Art and Design in the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences here at the University of Chester. He'll be delivering his inaugural lecture shortly. And I have to say, this lecture is really exciting, and I think it's going to be really special. Simon's scholarly and public revival of the 19th century British cartoonist and actor Marie Duval, undertaken with two other scholars who are present tonight, Roger Sabin and Julian Waite, has changed the history of comics, illustration and periodical publishing. Since the publication of the book Marie Duval and the academic publication Marie Duval, Maverick Victorian Cartoonist, no future historian of comics in English can be written without her. Now, Simon mentioned to me that he knew that his work on Duval's drawings had finally succeeded when he, Julian and Roger were asked to write the first entry on her in the Dictionary of National Biography. Her revival, he said, and her elevation to the canon was complete. No hubris there, Simon. No. But back to Simon. His scholarship combines rigour with methodological range and a profound understanding of the relationship between past and present. He is genuinely that very rare thing, an historian of comics, a theorist of comics, and a comic artist. Rigour is a key word here. Simon navigates the pitfalls inherent in applying ideas and methods from one discipline to another with meticulous scholarship and, as well as, I think, great energy, flair and originality. His graphic adaptations of Anthony Trollope's John Caldecott and Robert Louis Stevenson's The Beach at Falaise are interrogative. To draw stories that have only previously been told reveals new questions and new insights about them. Apparently, scholars had not given sufficient significance to the fact that the first word in Trollope's novel is perhaps, until Simon was faced with the challenging task of drawing equivocation. So we'll learn a bit more about that tonight. To come back to the point about rigour, the rigour in Simon's work derives from his profound understanding of drawing and visual storytelling, evidenced in the 2022 monograph, Thinking About Drawing, and the 2017 monograph, A Theory of Narrative Drawing, which Simon has many times tried to explain to me, and I'm looking forward to some more articulation tonight. I'm sure we'll hear a lot about it tonight. But let's just think for a second about Simon's career as well, not just the academic work that he's done. His academic career encompasses about 35 years of work as a fine artist, running a visual art studio between the US and the UK with artist Christopher Sperandio. This duo focuses on popular media, encompassing, interestingly enough, chocolate, television broadcasting, digital platforms and comics. Simon's practice now provides a model for the ways in which scholarship empowers others. He's a committed teacher whose own work demonstrates the energising and nourishing role of research in the lecture, theatre and on the page and beyond in the academy. Many cohorts of nascent scholars, readers and listeners will have him to thank for encouraging him on their journey and guiding them on their own paths. And he genuinely acknowledges his luck, having much luck in having the support and encouragement of many people around him, and so many people in his career so far, lots of whom will be here in the room, watching online and will enjoy tonight's lecture. And we're very lucky, I think, to have him for an hour to talk to us. And on a personal level, I have really thoroughly enjoyed working with Simon, as in his other role, he is Associate Dean for Research and Innovation in the faculty. He's a great colleague to have, really energising. He has made a real difference, I think, to our faculty here in popularising the research, the excellent research and innovation that we've got there. And he's a real pleasure to work with as well. So that's enough from me. We want to hear more from you, Simon. Please welcome Professor Simon Grennan.
Thanks, Paul. If only the lecture could just end there. Thanks very much. That's very kind. So tonight I'm going to go back in time 30 years, and more than 30 years, and I'm going to look at the practice of an artist team that seems very distant, but of course it's not that distant in a sense, because half of the artist team was me, and in fact half the artist team is me. And so I'm going to do that very odd thing. I'm in a privileged position of having been in practice for a long time, since June 1990 in public, when I set up a visual art studio with Chris Sperandio, who's an American artist who I still work with on occasion, although our relationship and our practice and our business has changed a lot in that time. And so I've had the privilege of the longevity of a practice that has not been linear and has not been studio-based, which has been about relationships. And so, curiously enough, the situation that I find myself in tonight is one that is very, very unlike the situation that I was in with Chris Sperandio in 1990. And so in a sense, this is an art historian's talk. And I'm going to focus particularly on a set of distinct problems that we faced in 1990 as young practitioners trying to make our way in the commercial and social and cultural environment of fine arts in English, if you like. And to do that, I'm going to get slightly technical, but I'll skip a little bit, and you'll see that really what's happened is that I'm going to be using language and ideas that I didn't have at the time. That I'm going to talk about my past in relationship to ideas that I've had subsequently and the person that I am now. So I'm talking about myself in the past with the advantage of being in the present. So to begin, I think that's good. So, as a topic for study, the impact of drawing technology upon drawing craft is commonplace and long-lived. Craft is a developed capacity for performing technical activities, where technology is most broadly defined as an environmental transformation of the bodily capacities of the crafter, or in the case of drawing, the term that I like to use, drafter, which in English has a comedy undertone, which I also like. Conversely, considering the impact of drawing craft upon drawing technology, the other way around, this evening I'm going to focus upon two related digital imaging operations used by the artists Grennan and Sperandio between 1996 and 2001. Edge recognition and vectorisation, I'll explain. And their concomitant iterative uses as drawing tools relative to older techniques such as tracing and rotoscoping, as the Vice-Chancellor mentioned, and older ideas about drawing. No sniggers? No, okay, awesome, good, yeah. I think I look better now. I think Sperandio and I, we've matured. Yeah, I'll leave it there. So, excellent. Grennan and Sperandio, Simon Grennan and Christopher Sperandio, Grennan and Sperandio met in Chicago, US in 1988 and established a fine arts studio in 1990. The same year, Grennan moved to Manchester, UK, and Sperandio moved to Manhattan, US, exclusively working together. Their fine art practice made collaborative remote working part of an encompassing artistic strategy, which they adopted to underline the significance of dialogue, compromise, and social relationships with others. Grennan and Sperandio are best known for creating the conditions in which the unionised line workers of a chocolate factory designed and produced their own chocolate, and for numerous participatory media projects, top left, and for facilitating and drawing very many people's history comics, telling other stories and with them and by them. Collaborative remote working relocated and demoted concepts of embodied authorship. The artists at that time hypothesized that the body of the artist provided evidence for authorship, which in turn substantiated a system of fine arts commodification and social reification in the form of relationships between the artist's hand, making, authorship, intentionality, the artist's studio, the art commodity, the art journal editor, always the big figure at that time, the art dealer, even bigger figure, the art collector, slightly shadowy figure, the museum curator, moving swiftly on, the museum benefactor, although in America, sometimes interesting, and the art investor, the commoditization of the artwork connected to the notion that somebody was making something unique by using their body to do it, the commodification of the body. Here we see Jackson Pollock, well known to everybody, whose work exemplifies the commodification of the artist's body. And then below that, the Somerset luxury fine art boutique, Hauser and Worth. And on the right, slightly more quixotically, Grennan Sperandios commercial art dealer in the mid-90s, Colin DeLand of American Fine Arts Company, Manhattan, looking awesome, actually, yeah, looking really good. Alternatively, Grennan and Sperandios' model of collaborative remote working signalled to others that the artist's value chain had been developed beyond this system of commodities. The artist's practice became a distributed business in which the social ecology of actors and their actions alone produced the artworks and alone provided them with significance. Collaborative remote working also had a profound functional effect, determined in part by the media and transportation technology of the mid-1990s. Working between Manchester and Manhattan in the 1990s located the artist's studio amongst air, train and car travel, postal systems, land-based telephonics. Do you remember those? Grennan and Sperandio added email as a studio capacity from September 1993. Yeah, wow, and look at that. Who had a 56K modem from America Online? And yeah, awesome, very good. The artist's strategic confounding of a commoditizing authorship system in their remote collaboration resulted in the creation of this mobile multi-site mediatized studio, a distributed business of actors and actions, as I said. As with all distributed businesses, mobility, multiple sites of work and mediatization underpinned the types of artworks that it was possible to make. Take, for example, these two works by Grennan and Sperandio from the 1990s. Here they are. On the left, Everyone in Farnham was a work that closed 7 streets in the centre of this Surrey town on a Saturday afternoon in June and invited residents to congregate to have their photograph taken. Anyone in New York, on the right, arranged meetings between employees of New York University and anyone else in the city that they liked to meet. Here, mail truck driver Roberto Martinez is photographed meeting Quentin Crisp. A significant consequence of the artist's relocation of authorship was the continual need to adjudicate their own and co-workers' different roles in the business. Allocating tasks within a distributed business is a foundational activity. It's one of the key things you have to sort out. Adjudicating levels of technical expertise, individual capacity, and the types of support required for participants to fulfill a task. So you have a car assembly line, for example, and then here a photograph of Jethro Head, who's the union boss at the chocolate factory that we worked with the employees to make their own chocolate in 1992. In 1995, on an insight of Sperandio, the artists started to adopt the comics medium. They found affinity with the histories of plural and often communal or collaborative experiences of comics readers, creators, and businesses, and with the relationship comics create between multiple readers of editions of the same comic, plus the rhythms of reading created by periodical production again and again, plus generic reader expectations of the comics themselves. Attractive though these aspects of the distributed business of comics were to the artists in 1995, An established idea about drawing presented a challenge to their development as artists in the medium, as comic book artists. The idea that the drawn mark provides direct evidence of the drafter's subjectivity and hence provides a direct experience of that subjectivity, that subject for viewers, leading to commoditization. This idea provides the basis for the hypothesis that drawings evidence authorship, as I've said, which results in commoditization. And so here we have this very straightforward example of Sotheby's commoditizing the artist's hand in sales and catalogues and authenticity notices. Is that a Twombly or is it a scribble undertaken by a 4-year-old daughter? It's a Twombly, obviously. Yeah, not to be rude about Twombly, I'm a big fan. Sorry, because we're being recorded, but actually I'm a big fan. Alternatively, both production and value in Grennan and Sperandios' 1990s practice derived entirely from the social ecology of actors and actions. Groups of people working together. Given a concept of drawing in which trace was conceived and valued as a direct experience of a single drafter, how did Grennan and Sperandio draw a line? Key question for us at this particular moment. To answer this question, the artists aim to facilitate drawing as part of their practice by stripping drawing of the significant traces of a unique, subjective authoring body. They try to achieve this by accumulating technical processes to such a large extent that the drawings these processes produced were only indexically significant, and I'll explain. In effect, the artist aimed to adopt drawing tools that would achieve the aim of producing index-only drawings. Traces are the direct remnants of drawing activities, whereas indices only point to the activity of the body from which they originate, but from which they are removed. Very straightforward distinction. A mark made with a finger in the sand, as shown on the left, is both a trace and an index of the drafter's body, whereas a print from a steel engraving on the right only takes its mark from the engraved plate, not from the engraver's body itself. Drawing technology designed to produce index-only drawing has a long practical history and a wide range of teleological motives. These remain underpinned by a general conception of drawing itself that was named in Florence in the 16th century. Now we're really going somewhere. Disegno. Here it is. Disegno, just Italian for drawing, is the technique of visualizing lines identifying the edges of represented objects, as in this painting by Michelangelo on the left, as opposed to techniques that visualize objects as part of an encompassing ecology of different modulations of light, as in this painting by Titian on the right. Disegno was a visual regime that associated the draw line with that wonderful phrase, ontological parsimony. The principle of the simplest is true, and with Platonic idealism, great Renaissance idea. The essence, the line reveals the essence in providing distinctions between one thing and another by dividing them. That's exactly how that works. For acolytes, a Disegno approach to drawing constituted evidence of mind itself, separated from its bodily basis. For some 16th century theorists, Michelangelo was idealistic, whereas Titian was sensual, with all the ethical dualities that that distinction produces. Mind and body, essence and iteration, even water and oil. Water on the left, oil on the right. Disegno had a specific relationship with tracing. The imaginative act of visualizing distinctions between objects by delineating their boundaries with lines inevitably realized a limited range of possibilities of drawn marks on, say, a page or a wall, Michelangelo, or a pot, Greeks. A drafter adopting a Disegno approach recognized that delineation dictated the relative proximity of marks on a surface, where you put stuff, as much as it separated one object from another in the drafter's imagination. Disegno approaches to visualization insist that a drafter consider the marked surface as transparent. That is, an item upon which marks can be placed while being seen through. Often this transparency is technical, as with the ground glass screen of a camera obscura or a layer in a digital drawing program. However, the technical function of transparency is also a productive principle of Disegno drawings, which bridges technology and idea by relocating the surface of a drawing to the patterns of light organized most frequently by a lens, so that the drafter imagines the drawing through the technology. As a result, a disegno approach to seeing and drawing frequently employed theorizations of vision and optical technology to determine where drawn marks were located relative to each other on the surface. Other properties of the drawn mark, color, density, thickness, the range of possible properties of line edges, all of that kind of stuff, lie exactly outside, entirely outside this system of correspondences. The 17th century camera obscura and the 20th century rotoscope are two such technical guides designed to allow the drafter to see distinctions between the objects they are viewing and to delineate them by tracing the lens-arranged patterns of light on the surface. In sum, technology which uses lenses to facilitate the location of drawn marks on a surface facilitates a disegno approach to drawing. Tracing from a pattern of light arranged by a lens still reproduces the way in which the optical technology organises what can be seen, the tactic array of the lens, although it does not reproduce, as I said, the appearance of this array as an image in any properties, colours or densities or tones, or because these properties are entirely irrelevant. They're outside the system. This is a locating system. In 1995, two practical challenges faced Grennan and Sperandio in seeking technology to enable index-only drawing. First, systematically determining the relative locations of marks according to visualizations of a world, and second, determining the visible properties of those marks. The artists recognized that the first challenge was being met at that time with a monolithic response by computer programmers, seeking to create tools exactly for digital drawing by relying on the depictive functions of the photographic image to organize these shapes as depictions themselves. At that historical moment, Sperandio recognized that there was a boom in digital image technology that was explicitly purposed to transform photographic images into images that we categorize as drawn, despite the complete insignificance of any marking capacities in those drawings when they're viewed. Hence, digital technology achieved index-only images exactly by overloading the image with the traces of so many authoring bodies that the traces are functionally indistinct. They're meaningless. The authoring bodies that leave these traces are the thousands of people involved in creating the whole ecology of the drawing apparatus, both hardware and software. All the programmers, designers, manufacturers, and shippers leave traces beyond visual comprehension, and that's the key. Utilizing a lens to arrange a pattern of light, digital photographs parcel the arrangement according to a raster grid of adjacent relative values of computer code, on or off chains, corresponding to visible differences of tone, that is the relative presence of light, and color, wavelengths of light, or pixels. We're kind of familiar with all this stuff now. Two visual systems are in play: the bending of light by a lens, as on the right, and the arrangement of this array into a grid of relative values, as Super Mario, obviously, on the left. In practice, the use of lenses and the arrangement of an image of a visible world as a grid was only half the response to the challenge facing Grennan and Sperandio in terms of where do we put the line. How were marks to be located according to this lens-arranged visualization? How could an array of marks be digitally expropriated from a lens-arranged grid of pixels? To answer this question, the relationship between the systems producing a grid of pixels and a system of marking must be understood as a specific dependency relationship, known in unified modeling language as a realization relationship, one of my favorite relationships. And I always have trouble with relationships, but a realization relationship's never let me go. A realization relationship describes a system, such as a language, a physical system, an economic system, or a social system that produces effects that are dependent upon it, but which are not one of its constituent parts. Consider a red apple. The electromagnetic spectrum, I told you we were going to get technical, no apologies for that, we'll be out of this bit soon. The electromagnetic spectrum, which let's call it, system A, constitutes light on the surface of the apple. However, human perception, let's call it system B, gives the apple the property of redness. A creature with different perceptual capacities, that is, a perceptual system other than B, might not perceive redness as a property of the apple, even though the electromagnetic spectrum range of the apple, system A, remains exactly the same. To specify the realization relationship at the heart of Grennan and Sperandios' digital drawing activities, I'd like to refer to work from 1990s computer programmers, Zhu Taboni, Dyke, and others. Of course, it's hardly the case that Grennan and Sperandio invented edge recognition technology. Rather, their work was contemporaneous with early commercially available proprietorial software, which we use in particular ways and in which we saw advantages because it was, in a sense, unformed. And I'm going to mention this because it's it's kind of Antiques Roadshow. Adobe Systems Photoshop 3.0, excellent, from 1995. Macintosh software system, 1987 to 96. Hardware such as the Apple Macintosh Pro Forma 560. 1994 to 95. That's the, we didn't buy new equipment, so we were using old equipment in the midnight. These programmers' work and the artists followed a disegno approach to drawing and seeing, in that they sought to identify specific types of tonal changes in a visual field as demarcating boundaries. This approach was syncretized as a single nominal task, edge detection in pixel arrays. Overall, edge detection concerns localization of a significant variation of the grey level image, we're talking the grid, and the identification of the physical phenomena that originated them, and that the rule commonly used to classify edges as true or false is that the plausibility value, I love computer programmers, of true edges is above a given threshold, wrote Giu and Tabone in 1998. The programmers shared a focus on three operations in edge recognition: differentiation, smoothing, and labeling. Differentiation consists in evaluating the desired derivatives of the image. Where's it going to end up? Smoothing consists of reducing noise, stuff you don't want. Labeling involves suppressing false edges. I love the idea of a false edge. The performance of these operations was obviously related. Differentiation identified discontinuities in the photometrical characteristics of the lens-derived image. That pixel is darker or lighter than that pixel. That pixel is, it's at the grey level, so it's always darker or lighter. Look, we've got a group of pixels that are a bit darker, a group of pixels that are a bit lighter. This gives rise to variation in the grey level image, which I've just explained. The most commonly used variations were called step edges. There were local extrema, called line edges, and 2D features formed where at least two edges met, called junctions. Smoothing, second one, and its partner function sharpening was explained at the time as the sharpening of edges and the smoothing of regions. So you've got you've identified in your disegno program what divides one area from another. Sharpening and smoothing. The edge becomes distinct. What's within and beyond the object, the edge, as the object becomes, well, its characteristics disappear, essentially. Dyke claimed at that time that viewers prefer images in which the smoothing is low and the sharpening is high. Quite right. The third operation, finally, labeling, is a corrective operation identifying false positives. I am actually going to have a drink. I'm just wandering around, rather like Les Dawson with a glass of water. I've got a great Les Dawson story, which anyway. Yeah, where was I? The third operation, labeling, is a corrective operation identifying false positives or visual items generated by the first two operations correctly, and that's the key, that don't conform to the desired output. You go through the system and something appears which you don't want. What are you going to do with that? Labeling. So, when making a drawing, the same mark can represent any type of change in a depicted scene, such as the boundary between dark and light, the edge of a sleeve, or the emanation of invisible force, as in comics, such as heat, smell, love, and anger. The three operations produce a false edge when a within threshold change is produced by the program, but this change does not correspond to the visual system of the desired output. You go through the system and there's all this stuff. It's produced systematically, but it's not what you want to see. Problem. However, the first class of false edges are noised edges, and we're kind of familiar with this still. The second class of false edges, called phantom edges, arise from the use of particular models for identifying tonal changes in the grid. Commonplace among these were the clustering of false edges around representations of textured surfaces and the shadowing of true edges with false edges generated by light effects in the source lens image, such as polarization, commonplace stuff. In fact, images with false edges, images produced by this system, these systems that made false edges, became in fact a telltale sign of the use of the three operations by computer programmers themselves. Grennan and Sperandio found that false positive results produced by photodigital edge recognition technology might actually be retained as a visible property of the final drawing. That is, as a property of a visual style. Aiming to make digital index-only drawings, Grennan and Sperandio had met their first challenge, systematically determining the relative location of marks according to visualizations of some story world. Meeting this first challenge actually, unfortunately, offered little help with the second challenge, which was determining the properties of these marks. You know where they're going to go, what are they going to be like? Unlike the first challenge, in the second challenge, the properties of marks had to be adjudicated from outside this system of guiding relative proximity on the surface. So what we're going to do now. 1990s photo-digital edge recognition systems allowed no variation of properties within what Dyke, Ridder and others call the regions. Sharpen the edge, smooth the region. That is, areas between thresholds of change, edges. The blurred edge of a circle here on the left and the shaded area within the blue circle in the middle, the grey circle in the middle, represented a serious challenge to Disegno's systems in which regions between lines have no status other than being the distance between the lines that locate and differentiate depicted objects. We must also bear in mind that lines under this system are simply long, thin regions, which is slightly mind-boggling. Okay, so contrast this with the affordances of other media, older, just other, such as lens-derived depth of field. Depth of field is an association made by viewers between different types of regional modulation and the relative proximity of depicted items to the viewer. In short, blurred areas in a lens-produced image are understood as being differently located to sharp areas, as in the photograph on the left. If it's sharp, it's closer, or it might not be closer, it might be here. The sharpness locates it in an illusion of depth, a quasi-illusion of depth, which is to do with the negotiation of sharp and blurred, sharp and blurred. And that's what photographs do. On the right, different medium again, a depicted painting exemplifies the use of what is called by painters edge control in the medium, in which hard and soft edges, hard edges and soft edges are arranged to guide the viewer past the relative depths depicted in the painting. A blur does something, let's say it softens something. In fact, what it does is that we're understood as seeing it in space in a different way to something that is delineated sharply. Fortunately, given that Grennan and Sperandio were aiming to use edge recognition technology to make drawings in the comics medium, the impossibility of any systematic modulation of regions was an advantage rather than a disadvantage. One of the generic expectations of comics is precisely the recognition of a formal juxtaposition of demarcated, unmodulated areas of tone and colour. Thank goodness for that. We'd have been in real trouble otherwise. Comics came to us in that way, maybe. In addition, in the 1990s, raster to vector programs were also becoming commercially available. Grennan and Sperandio embraced vectorisation to further consolidate the generic formal properties of comics, building a further production stage into their drawing process. Vectorisation is a digital process of converting a matrix, such as a raster grid, into a column, where a column enables the location of endpoints and a spine. The artists used commercially available vectorisation software, which again was kind of, not its infancy exactly, but in terms of its available domestic use, was actually unformed or partly formed, and allowed us to do things with it that weren't in the instruction manual, let's say. The artists used commercially available vectorisation software such as was bundled with Macromedia freehand products, anyone remember that, 1995, entirely superseded by Illustrator, running on operating systems and hardware that I've described. Vectorisation finds straight line segments from raster images, grouping pixels into raw wires according to characteristic point and line width. These establish the edge of the line first and calculate the middle points of the pair of points on two opposite parallel edges after, as in this kind of demonstration. With a combination of images derived from lens-based raster grids and raster edge recognition technology to locate marks on a surface, answering our first challenge in 1995, plus the addition of vectorisation to generate the properties of marks, comic-y marks, by 1996, Grennan and Sperandio had met the terms of the two challenges facing them in aiming to make digital index-only drawings. Early in the millennium, so 5 years, 6 years later, early in the millennium, these processes had become a commercial commonplace in digital imaging. Finally, you'll be pleased to know, the artists develop a production architecture to guide the combination of these processes and enable co-workers and practice participants to join in making index-only drawings. In a 1996 paper, Madeira, Stork and Gross outlined a production architecture for digital drawn animation that places computed operations in relation to each other as a program of work. It agrees to some extent with the contemporaneous production architecture utilized by Grennan Sperandio. Madeira, Stork and Gross outlined 6 modules comprising their proposed digital production architecture. You start here, 6 steps later you end up with a drawing. Pre-processing, scanning to produce raster image files, and then undertaking these edge recognition processes. Painting or colouring, which is a sense starts as they don't do any vectorisation, but the painting stage is kind of like that. Computer-assisted painting, which is consolidating colours across their animation spectrum, which again is kind of vectorisation, say the properties of the mark are being produced, and then vectorisation. Interactive in-betweening, or the interpolation of vector non-keyframe images, which is part of the animation process they had, which we didn't have because we're producing stills, and scene compositing, layer stacking, which we definitely did have. We made a series of drawings and layer them one over the other to produce a final image. Compare this architecture, and we're going to wait at least 15 minutes for you to read this. No, that's not true. Finally, compare this architecture with Grennan and Sperandio's production architecture developed with modifications between 1996 and 2001. Both Madeira, Stork and Gross and Grennan and Sperandio agreed that this production architecture ensured that the topology of the image's content was preserved and the line thicknesses were kept within a given margin. The first being the way in which you locate the lines on the surface, and the second being the type of line it is. Both the programmers and artists also integrated opportunities for manual modification into the production architecture, that is, changes made by hand. Fortunately, those were unrecognizable, and therefore it was impossible to valorize that authorship as commodity, we thought. I have mentioned our art dealer already. Both these programmers and artists aimed to interpolate digital operations with genre-defining analog techniques of depictive drawing, multiple modification and repetition. It was the case that in comparison to tools commercially available at the time, these approaches were relatively robust. We used them again and again, needing only a few interactions. It was also not too demanding in terms of computing performance. We didn't need to buy a lot of processing power or memory, thank goodness. And it was possible for us and others to use these techniques for making index-only drawings on what was essentially very, very low-cost hardware. It was cheap. In 1996, Grennan and Sperandio were motivated by their underlying dissatisfaction with dominant production models founded on the commodification of artists' bodies to develop, modify and apply emerging digital imaging processes. Aiming to collectivize drawing by accumulating bodily traces, past the point of visible comprehensibility, the artists joined contemporaneous computer programmers in developing methods of index-only drawing. A corollary of this achievement was the creation of the capacity for anybody or a group to make a drawing that followed the production architecture and used the same techniques. Pause for a moment. That's a topic for another lecture. What happened when it got away from us? By developing index-only drawing, Grennan and Sperandio relocated a range of established drawing craft skills, effected the redundancy of other craft skills, and enabled remote collaborative team production in the context of a widely distributed business, in Grennan and Sperandio's case, with teams of participants across the Atlantic. In doing so, not only did Grennan and Sperandio utilize vectorization to visibly fulfill some of the formal generic expectations of the comics medium, but combined with their use of edge recognition capacities, they also transformed the technology of drawing for comics as a group production task without meaningful recourse to trace. Thank you.
Willing to take some questions?
I am, yes.
Yes.
I'm delighted.
Who's going to ask the first question? Vice-Chancellor.
Can take the prerogative. In the 1990s, I was trying to teach students how to get from raster to vector for geographic information systems, which were developing exactly the same time, and the attributes of the raster squares and how you then didn't lose those when you went to a vector. So that was really, it's really parallel to some of this. But I just wanted you to unpack, and you explained it brilliantly, far better than I probably did. I just want you to unpack that idea of other people able to use it, because I immediately thought that means they're not artists, that they are, you know, it opens it up to everybody and you just have to do the indexation side of it. So is that what you meant?
Yes, so when I hint at that's another topic, that's a topic for another lecture.
Yeah.
Is that we weren't the only visual practitioners undertaking this work who were not computer programmers. There were other visual artists using these techniques, and in fact there was a in the very late 90s, maybe the earliest 98, 99 really, into the millennium, there was a boom in folks using these processes who were not us, and this challenged our idealistic thoughts about democratization of drawing, because if everybody could do what we were doing, we found that we'd not overturned the commoditization system, we were ruined by it. And so we faced a challenge, and we stopped using these techniques as a result. We learned a lesson, and so we changed the style of our drawing. We changed the way in which we worked with others to make drawings in this way, in order to strip the drawing of its pre-authored bodily trace. In doing that, we'd worked ourselves out of the market. We hadn't changed the market. And so that was a problem. How were we going to continue? And in fact, it was a great challenge. It was both a theoretical challenge and a cultural challenge, a social challenge for us. What we'd said, well, we can do this. We'll give this technique to folks who want to use it. What happened is that everybody started to make drawings that were Grennan and Sperandio drawings. Commoditization rolled over us like a steamroller, and we had to deal with it.
Any other questions for Simon? Don't be shy. Let's have some more questions.
I was just interested in where this might go next with the famous AI. So if you think about emotion and intent, you talked a bit about emotion and intent. I mean, presumably it's possible to inject that emotion and intent into these indexed drawings in a non-human way.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, we relied on the fact that I suppose we think, and still, in some ways we still think, I still think certainly, that the reception is key. And so actually the emotion is not in the artist's practice or in the stuff. It's in the situation in which the art is found and used. And so it's about the user. And so those emotions will rush in to fill any void. In fact, there is no void. There's never a void. One always has an emotional relationship with, particularly with visual images, and therefore it becomes a question of how the user, the viewer, is empowered to understand what it is that they're looking at, and that's the way in which they frame their emotional responses. And so there are massive trust relationships that are involved in, which is part of the challenges for AI. I mean, AI is unlike this in the sense that these techniques were used to bury the body, and AI accumulates bodies, but whose bodies they are. So I call the AI a typification engine. AI only uses information that already exists in the world, and that's categorically not what we were doing here. And therefore, what it does is that AI privileges and generates certain types of body over others. So as I think I've said in the past elsewhere, if you command generative AI, an image generative AI, a university professor, then it comes up with white guys, old white guys. And that's a very different that's a typification challenge. It's looked at the most likely results out there in its trillions and trillions and trillions of examples, combined them as most likely. What's the most likely? Oh yeah, well, of course the most likely is it's a 6-year-old bloke, white bloke. This is very different to our motivations for burying the body are very different to the motivations of AI of accumulating bodies that are weirdly disembodied because they have no subjectivity. They don't breathe or eat or pay or cry or, yeah.
Much food for thought. Any other questions?
So I'm just interested in this forming issue of the definition of an artist, and also your position, because you've taken yourself out to become the historian of an artist, which is yourself, who is actually working with another artist, so then also there's a complication of collaboration, and then there's a complication of commodification and the romanticisation of the artist.
Indeed.
And then we come down to it, whether the artist is somebody who is the generator of idea, and is that idea then generated singularly or within? That seems to be the underlying layer that's going on here, which
I think
we're all skitting around,
that
romantic notion of the artist.
Sure. I mean, those are relatively new ideas about what artists are. They're relatively 18th and 19th century ideas. And so they're not that long lived in a way. And so, the notion of the artist as artisanal, as being the person who's able to produce the great bread, which you like to eat because the bread is good to eat. There are all sorts of models for what the artist might be. In the early 90s when we trained, or late 80s when we trained, those discussions were still, they were fading in a way. So there was a notion that it wasn't seen as particularly, it was becoming less important to understand where the art lay. It became more important to us in particular, and there was idealism in this, it's a long time ago, where the democratization of various aspects of craft, this is one of them, we didn't actually know what was going to happen, but we assumed that it would relocate the artist. And of course it did relocate the artist, but it also had other effects within a frameworks which we couldn't affect and didn't understand. And so I think that we're not in a situation where I don't think the notions of the artist are particularly contested because nobody cares. Right. And so so it's a kind of vanity. There's a notion of the art of, and because there are so many ways of undertaking art practice, so many ways, plurality is beyond imagining. We have an idea of, the Global South has its answers to our ideas about what artists are, for example. That we can find those models multiplying all over the place, and it becomes a question of thinking, well, which model and why, which model and how, who do we work with to do those things? I think those are the artists' challenges. Now.
Wow, controversial. So, a question from Charles there. It might have to be the last question, Charles.
Simon, thanks ever so much for that. Okay, if you go from process to product, and you showed us incredible products that emerged from the collaboration. Yeah. There's sort of a continuity in the materiality of those the products. Yeah. And I wonder, at what point did you realise and factor in the thought that you could go from a material graphic narrative to a digital version? And how does that fit into this story?
I think, this crisis that we had, where other people's use of the technology and recognition of what you could do with it caught up with us. We were maybe 3 or 4 years ahead of the game, which is quite a long time. And crikey, we didn't monetize that advantage anywhere near as much as we might have. Really, seriously, there was a moment. It wasn't really a moment, but there were some watershed examples, and one of them is a Tango advert. And so I saw an animated advert for those of you online and elsewhere in the world. Tango is a sweet orange fizzy drink, been sold for a very long time in the UK, and it's heavily advertised on occasion. And in the 90s, they made some very famous Tango adverts, very controversial, a lot of attention. And one of those involved line recognition, rotoscoping. And we thought, folks called us up and said, congratulations on the Tango. Well, indeed. And so that, in a way, that achieved what we'd set out to do. But was that right? It wasn't us. And of course, the thing is that, in a sense, the whole thing about this talk and looking back like that is that if you say it's not us, then somebody's going to go, no, it isn't. And that's what happened. So the digital, in terms of us making digital comics, for example, these are other stories. This is a long time ago. And so there's been lots of stages in between.
Okay, well, don't go away, Simon. Can I call upon Roger Saban to deliver the vote of thanks?
You do. In the zone.
Right. So, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Simon. Excellent. So I've got 5 minutes to offer this vote of thanks, which is meant to be personal in tone. So I'm going to start at the beginning. I met Simon 30 years ago when I was asked to chair a discussion between him and Neil Gaiman, somebody you might have heard of, in front of a large audience at the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Art in London. So this was a big deal. He's cancelled now, of course. Neil Gaiman, I mean.
I'm just waiting.
Yes. So, but at the time, Neil Gaiman's books were in the charts. His Sandman books were gathering a lot of attention. He was a major star. So I thought, poor old Simon. You know, he's going to have to get up on that stage, and he'll be overshadowed. And I thought, well, I'll have to look after him and protect him a bit because he'll be intimidated. So let me ask you, the audience, I mean, do you think Simon was intimidated? Right, so you all know Simon, right? That's correct. No, he wasn't intimidated, but he was the opposite of intimidated. And none of us could get a word in edgewise, obviously. But he was exciting and brilliant, of course. He was the star of that night at the ICA, just as he's the star tonight. So back then, Simon was in his first career, as you've just seen, as a fine artist, and a very successful one. He once told me that he made, quote, adult money, unquote. So with his partner, Grennan Sperandio, he was pushing the boundaries of contemporary art, and that did include making comic books. Now I have a collection of those comics you've just seen, and I would ask Simon to sign them, but I don't want to devalue them any further. So after those heady days, he decided to try a new path, and he signed up for a PhD at the University of the Arts, London, and I was his supervisor. And I thought, poor old Simon, you know, he's coming at this, it's a new thing, he's coming at this from a different world, and he'll be intimidated by all the theory. And, you know, a PhD is a really hard thing to do. Do you think he was intimidated? No, of course not. He ended up completing the degree in 2 years, which was a university record. I've never had a student before or since who's done that. Remarkable. And of course, during the course of the PhD, it was him teaching me, not the other way around. So by now we were firm friends, and it was time for Simon to edge a little bit further into academia. And he started to publish in the journals, to speak at conferences. The talks were always electric, as you can imagine. And, the suits. Oh, God. If I had more than 5 minutes, I could tell you about the suits. So he worked his way up from academic jobs where the pay was very far from adult money to now where he's a major figure in comic studies and drawing studies. But he's also made significant contributions to fine art studies, pedagogical studies, queer studies, and others. Today, he is, of course, professor here at the university and taking a leadership role, which is exactly where he should be. And the suits are still amazing. Okay, so what is less well known about the story is the way that Simon has constantly helped younger scholars. He will spend hours and hours and hours of his time with them. They don't understand what he's saying, but he will spend hours and hours and hours of his time with them.
I don't think folks will listen, Roger.
Seriously, this is hugely admirable, and he's helped a lot of people. And this is the last thing I'll say. Simon loves to collaborate, and that's another great quality. It's a hangover from his artist days, and he's made it a mainstay of his academic life. And again, it's about sharing. He even worked with me and with Julian Waite, who was here tonight. And that was great fun, even though I had to smarten up a bit in every sense. So, it's just my opinion, but I would say that Simon is not just the best dressed man in academia, but also one of the leading intellectuals in the UK arts and humanities at the moment. I know that sounds very grand, but don't take my word for it. Read his stuff and decide for yourselves. I think the University of Chester is very lucky to have him. So thank you, Simon, for your contribution, your sense of humour, and for your generosity. Many congratulations.
I don't know how we're going to follow that. Actually, that was a lovely vote of thanks. And Simon is a unique talent. We're great. It's great that we've got you here, and I'm sure you'd like to spend half an hour, 15 minutes enjoying a drink with Simon, and then we can go and look at the exhibition that we've got in Senate House and have some dinner with him. So thank you, Simon Grennan. That was fantastic.